Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, now it is time for the main event of March, the March Madness Tournament Pick'em, the March Madness bracket, known as the Thomas Take Madness Bracket. What's going on, everybody? My name is Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, for the remainder of the evening, for the remainder of the night, or whenever you guys decide to take the time out of your day to tune into this podcast as I adjust my glasses here. Give me one moment. All right, we're rolling. We're good. So, March Madness, I've had a love-hate relationship with March Madness for a long time. Mainly it was due to the fact that I did not have much of a rooting interest. The university that is known around my hometown as the University of Buffalo, the Buffalo Bulls, they were not really a viable program for quite a long time. Whereas the last 4 or 5 years, they have been a viable program, and they've won the MAC, tournament. They've won the MAC championship the last 2 years, and they have had a berth in this tournament the last 2 years. And it was truly remarkable. They've had, quite a few seasons prior to that were pretty successful with Bobby Hurley, and then Bobby Hurley leaves UB and goes to Arizona State, and they bring in this coach, Nate Oates, who Bobby Hurley did bring in, but Bobby Hurley took a lot of the recruits with him to Arizona, and Nate Oates kind of had to start this team up again from scratch with his own players that fit his offensive and defensive style. And one of the few guys that was still around is Perkins, the giant, swing man, the sixth man on this team that is a very, very good player. But the true identity of this team is C.J. Massenberg, and Massenberg is known and should be known as probably the best player that's ever played UB basketball at the University of Buffalo. And I'm very happy to have been able to witness what he has been able to accomplish while wearing the royal blue and white UB basketball uniform. UB's had a lot of success, not just in basketball, men's basketball, but in women's basketball as well. They have had a few runs in the tournament. They have gone deep into the win column, as has the UB men's basketball team. But the UB men's basketball, UB women's basketball have done great. UB's football team has also done great, and a prospect to keep our eye on for the NFL draft for all the football fanatics out there. Anthony Johnson, wide receiver out of UB, as well as the quarterback Tyree Jackson. I'm very interested to see where those guys go, and I think those are actually two players that should be seen as NFL talents, guys that can make an impact and make their move in their own sport. But C.J. Massenberg is a guy that should be drafted. Jeremy Harris has been phenomenal these last few games towards the end of the season, as well as the MAC championship game a few days ago against Bowling Green. He's actually upped his stock. So a huge determining factor in my interest in March Madness these last 2 years has been due to the fact that the University of Buffalo has been in the tournament these last 2 years, and they have really maintained their top spot in the MAC conference. 31-3, one of the best records in college basketball, one of the best coached teams in college basketball. Nate Oates deserves all the credit in the world, and it's a truly remarkable testament to his eye for talent that he was able to bring in players that not only fit his scheme offensively and defensively, but to do it in a very short window of time. You're talking a couple seasons that this guy's been the coach of the UB Bulls basketball team, men's basketball team, and he has done a phenomenal job. So that being said, the big question is, where do I have UB going in this tournament? Let's start off with the round of 64. Round of 64, I have Duke winning that first matchup versus NCCU or NDSU, North Dakota State, as the play-in, one of the play-in matchups. I have them beating North Dakota State. And then I have UCF playing Duke in the round of 32. Mississippi State takes on Liberty. Mississippi State, believed to be the 5th seed. And they're playing Liberty, who is the 12th seed. Mississippi State, I have them winning that matchup, moving on to the round of 32. Virginia Tech versus St. Louis. I have Virginia Tech beating St. Louis, moving into the round of 32. Maryland versus Temple. I have Temple winning into their play-in matchup, and I have Maryland beating them. Maryland would then face LSU after LSU beats Yale. Louisville will beat Minnesota. Michigan State will beat Bradley. Gonzaga will move on, beating FDU. Syracuse will beat Baylor, moving on to face Gonzaga. Marquette will beat Murray State. Florida State versus Vermont. Florida State winning that. And then I have UB facing their former head coach, Bobby Hurley, and the Arizona State Sun Devils. I have UB winning that one, making it to the round of 32 versus the winner of the next matchup, Texas Tech versus Northern Kentucky. Nevada beating Florida. Michigan beating Montana. And then on the other side of the bracket, there's some teams that really, obviously, on the left side of the bracket, you got Duke, you have Virginia Tech, you have LSU, you have Michigan State, you have Gonzaga, you have Florida State, you have Buffalo, you have Texas Tech, you have Michigan. Those are the teams that I largely picked. I largely went with the higher seeds on the left side of the bracket. On the right side of the bracket, I have Virginia beating Gardner-Webb, Oklahoma as the 9th seed beating the 8th seed Mississippi, Wisconsin beating Oregon, Kansas State beating UC Irvine, Villanova beating St. Mary's, Then Villanova versus Purdue would be the next matchup. Cincinnati beating Iowa, Tennessee beating Colgate, North Carolina versus Iona, North Carolina winning that one. Utah State versus Washington. Utah State winning that one. Auburn versus New Mexico State. Auburn moving on to that one. Iowa State beating Ohio State, which I actually consider that an upset, being that Iowa State is not really known for their basketball, but they're at a 6th seed. Ohio State at an 11 seed this year. Houston beating Georgia State. Wofford beating Seton Hall. Kentucky beating Abilene Christian, which would move us into the round of 32. And round of 32, I have Duke beating UCF. Mississippi State versus Virginia Tech. I have Virginia Tech winning that one. Maryland versus LSU. I have LSU winning that one. Louisville versus Michigan State. I have Michigan State winning that one, which would mean that Duke would play Virginia Tech in the round of 16. LSU would play Michigan State in the round of 16. Gonzaga would beat Syracuse. Florida State would beat Marquette, which would be Gonzaga versus Florida State. UB would be taking on Texas Tech. I have UB beating Texas Tech, moving on to the round of 16, Sweet 16. Nevada facing Michigan, losing to Michigan. So in the round of 16, the Sweet 16, you'd have UB moving forward in the West and coming off of 2 wins, one versus Arizona State, one versus Texas Tech, where they'd be facing John Beilein. And John Beilein is the head coach of Michigan Wolverines. And Local guy, right? Straight out of Lockport, New York, my hometown. So that would be really cool to see him go up against UB and Nate Oates, who is probably one of the rising coaches, definitely a coach that has made his mark heading into this tournament. And I have UB beating Michigan. I think that out of those two teams, it's crazy to think that I believe that UB is deeper, that they have more depth, and that they have more ways to win that game than Michigan does. Not taking anything away from Michigan, but the momentum with UB is there right now, where I think the momentum with Michigan is somewhat past. They're a great team, but I see Buffalo winning that one. You move on to the round of 8, the Elite 8. According to my bracket, I would have Duke beating Virginia Tech in the round of 16, LSU meeting Michigan State, losing to Michigan State, Gonzaga beating Florida State, and UB beating Michigan. And then in the round of 16 on the other side, I'd have Virginia over Wisconsin, Villanova over Tennessee in a very close game. Tennessee is a team that I think should definitely get more props than what they have been given. But I think Villanova has had such a successful run these last few years, it's really hard for me to pick against Villanova. North Carolina versus Kansas. North Carolina winning that one. Kentucky versus Iowa State. Despite the fact that Iowa State makes it to the Sweet 16, they ultimately lose to Kentucky. And the Elite 8 on the East and West would be Duke, Michigan State, Gonzaga, and Buffalo. The round of 8 would be Virginia, Villanova, North Carolina, and Kentucky. So those are the 8 teams left. Duke, Michigan State, Gonzaga, Buffalo, and then Virginia, Villanova, North Carolina, Kentucky. So those are the Elite 8. I have UB making it to the Elite 8. Unfortunately for UB, they'd be facing Gonzaga, who I feel like is more experienced in this round of the tournament, and Gonzaga would win a very close game against UB. Duke would beat Michigan State in a very back-and-forth game, but one that I think Zion Williams will take over. Villanova would beat Virginia to make it to the semis. Villanova, I think, would win that game very closely as well. And then North Carolina versus Kentucky, I think North Carolina will win that one soundly, which would put the Final Four, Duke versus Gonzaga, Villanova versus North Carolina. All 4 teams have had major success these last 10, 15 years. But I would have Duke beating Gonzaga, and I would have Villanova beating North Carolina, which would make the NCAA championship, collegiate basketball championship, Duke versus North Carolina, probably the 2 best universities in the country for NCAA basketball, 2 of the best teams in the country at NCAA basketball. I think 1 versus 1, 2 1 seeds meeting in the finals is very easy to predict, especially when these 2 brands have become so successful. But I think Duke would beat North Carolina. My tiebreaker final score is 89-82. This would be a valiant scenario for UB, for the University of Buffalo. This would be one where UB fans would be able to hang their hat on this and say, hey, we made it to the Elite 8. We did what we needed to do in order to become a viable entity in the NCAA. And as long as you have this, knowing this hanging over our heads as UB fans, I think we could come to the conclusion that we never expected any of this. The fact that we're getting this, the fact that we've witnessed the 31-3 season that UB has had, they're in the perfect conference in the MAC, playing the matchups that they're playing at the level they're playing them. I never want to see UB out of that conference. I think the MAC is perfect for them, and they're able to make the most of it. For many years, UB couldn't make the most of that opportunity, and now they are, thanks to Nate Oates, thanks to Lance Leipold, and so many others. So that's how I have it, and I think part of it is the fact that, it'd be really easy for me to put UB in the Final Four. I'd love to do it, but that would make me a homer, and it would make me pretty biased. It's not saying that it can't happen. I think UB is probably the biggest sleeper team in this tournament. The team that might be the biggest underdog, the team that will be looked at as, they don't belong here, but they might get underestimated, and that might lead them to winning more matchups than what is expected. So who really knows? This is all a shot in the dark. This is really tough to call. But I think Duke, North Carolina, Gonzaga, and Villanova are the 4 best teams in terms of experience at this level, experience in this tournament, and coaching. Coach K, Coach Williams are the 2 best. And that's why I have Duke facing UNC in the final, with Duke winning another NCAA championship. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was my March Madness bracket. Hopefully UB fans enjoyed it. I know I'll enjoy seeing Nate Oates here, hopefully for the foreseeable future. He signed that 5-year deal, but who knows what could happen. I'm assuming that he has to serve those 5 years, but you never know these days, right? Take care, everybody.